everyone, my name is Wedge and welcome back to our tournament review series. It's been a couple of weeks and Pro Tour Cons of Tarkir was crazy. It's still relatively early in this new format. In fact, we've only had 2 weekends worth of big standard events since rotation, which makes it all the more interesting to see what the pros have made of the new selection of cards. And while we certainly saw a lot of innovation in the top 8, we also had a couple familiar strategies come up. Our Pro Tour winner was Ari Lax, who played an Obzan mid-range deck to victory. This deck was not unlike the Obzan mid-range decks we saw 2 weeks ago. It was through the number of Obzan decks we saw this weekend that we can understand the real power of Sorin's Solemn Visitor. Think of it this way: Siege Rhino already swings any damage race back toward you when it enters the battlefield. When it continues to do so on the attack or on the block, that's pretty ridiculous. Wingmate Rock was also a huge contender this weekend. Not only is the deck running 2, but Sorin's -2 also gives you a token that can either chump an opponent's rock in a pinch or let you set up your own raid trigger. In a format where most decks are geared toward a mid-range or tempo game, all the Obzan Charms modes are relevant. In particular, its third mode, while not seen too often, could reliably come down at the right time to make a small creature solid, or a big creature even better. Beyond all that, this list was the most Planeswalker heavy in our top 8. Ajani Mentor of Heroes showed up as a 3 of. We saw a few Ajanis in similarly colored mid-range decks pre-rotation, but this is the first we've seen of him since then. He works because when so many games come down to clashes between huge creatures, having creatures that are just a bit huger is often enough to get there. Elspeth Sun's Champion also featured in the list, no doubt infamously after Lax's elation to top deck one to close out the semi-finals. Elspeth gives the deck a potent answer to big creatures, and allows it to win a drawn-out attrition-heavy ground battles by reaching her -7 and taking to the skies. Finishing in second place, Sean McLaren ran a variation on the Jeskai tempo deck we saw a few weeks ago entitled Jeskai Wins. This deck played a more controlling game than its predecessors. While Goblin Rabblemaster and Mana Strider were still 4 ofs, the list included only 1 Seeker of the Way. 2 Sark and the Dragon Speaker remain as the only Planeswalker in the list. Removal takes a higher priority, with Anger of the Gods and Banishing Light both fitting in as 2 ofs. The typical assortment of burn spells, Magma Jet, Lightning Strike, Stoke the Flames, and the versatile Jeskai Charm were joined by 4 Dig Through Time. This was a card that we didn't see much of 2 weeks ago, but this weekend it's certainly proven its worth. In spell-heavy decks like this, it's trivial to build up enough Delve Fuel to cut its cost in half. And going 7 cards deep to, well, dig out whatever you need is every bit as powerful as it sounds. This is a deck that can still play the tempo game, but can also switch into a full-on control role, especially when it completes its play set of Anger of the Gods and adds End Hostilities off the sideboard. It wasn't quite enough to get there against the overwhelming board presence of Obzan midrange, but it came close. 1 life point close. Tiago Saporito saw a good deal of success with his more aggressive take on Obzan midrange, taking 3rd place. Granted, he wasn't quite so low curved as Mike Sigris' aggro list, which we'll be looking at next. However, he did include cards like Fleecemane Lion and On Offense of the Foremost that didn't find homes in the more control-oriented lists. His creature package also included a full set of Wingmate Rock. This is clearly a man who wants to attack and still win wars of attrition, and Wingmate Rock is practically tailor-made for that. He also had some fairly unusual inclusions like Drown in Sorrow and Whip of Erebos, each as 1 ofs. In fairness though, Whip of Erebos is yet another tool for maintaining attrition while going on the offensive. Not to mention, whipping back a Wingmate Rock or Siege Rhino is a powerful move. Plus, none of his creatures actually die to Drown in Sorrow, well, except for Sorin's tokens, but you can always just make more of those. Mike Sigris' Obzan aggro build was solid, but not quite solid enough to get him past its mid-range big brother, so he took 4th. This was a much leaner build of the Obzan color scheme. Many of the heavy hitters were the same. Sorin, Siege Rhino, and Obzan Charm, for instance, all made appearances. But the deck focused more on the low end of the curve overall. Beyond just Fleecemane Lion, he also included Rakshasa Death Dealer and Heir of the Wilds at 2 mana to give his deck a fast start. There were quite a few games where an early Fleece mainline was unanswerable once it went monstrous, and Heir of the Wilds having Death Touch was huge in a field full of big but mostly ground-bound creatures. This deck also ran a full set of On Offense of the Foremost rather than just one, as well as Herald of Torment. While those 3-drops were more vulnerable than the 2s, they were heavy hitters if they got to stick around. This was made possible in part by the inclusion of Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Urborg allowed Sigris to run 4 Windswept Heath even with only 1 Plains and 2 Forests to fetch. Surplus Heaths just became swamps thanks to Urborg. Yvonne Flock, who won Pro Tour Magic 2015 with a true draw-go blue-white control deck, was back to make the lightning strike twice with blue-black control. While he lost in the first round of top 8 elimination, he did still end up sitting at 5th place. His creatures consisted entirely of Prognostic Sphinx as a 4-of, a much speculated post-rotation control finisher. Beyond that, his deck was entirely what you'd expect from a control deck in these colors. Playsets of Dissolve and Disdainful Stroke set this deck up against the mid-range decks that have been dominating the format. Bioblight and Drown in Sorrow fight back against more aggressive strategies with smaller, more numerous creatures. Hero's Downfall and Silence of Believers picked off anything not taken care of by the above. Despise and Thoughtseize made for solid proactive answers to threats, and Dig Through Time was there to dig for answers. Sure, some of those cards were dead in some matchups, but those just get pitched to Prognostic Sphinx when someone tries to remove it. And having a bigger graveyard makes Dig Through Time easier to cast. Unfortunately, in practice, the deck wasn't quite fast enough to fight off aggro decks, like the Obzan aggro deck we just looked at. Andre Strasky took 6th place with another deck called Jeskai Wins. However, he had a very different strategy in mind from the decks that shared its name. He omitted Planeswalkers entirely and ran 17 creatures, none of which were Goblin Ravelmaster. 4 Seeker of the Way and 4 Manus Rider were fairly predictable, as were 2 Stormbreath Dragon. The other creatures were 3 Ashcloud Phoenix and 4 Hushwing Gryph. With the still present burn components to this deck, the Gryph was arguably worth it just to shut down Siege Rhino's trigger. Turning off Wingmate Rock is a nice bonus. As for Ashcloud Phoenix, it acts a bit like a slower version of Chandra's Phoenix. It also comes with the added benefits of speeding up the burn game a bit and being in a slow enough format where 6 mana for a morph cost isn't unreasonable. In spite of the differences in creature base, the spells were similar. Playsets of the Burn Curve of Magma Jet, Lightning Strike, Jeskai Charm, and Stoke the Flames were joined by 3 Banishing Light as a catch-all for anything too big to burn off. Yuya Watanabe finished 7th with yet another rather different Jeskai Wins deck. His took probably the most truly tempo route of all of them. He took the creature baseline of 4 each, Seeker of the Way, Goblin Ravelmaster, and Manus Rider, and added 3 Brahmas, King of Oreskos. 3 Sark and the Dragon Speaker comprised the Planeswalker section of his list. He supplemented the Jet Strike Stoke Charm spell package with 2 God's Willing. This gave him a way to truly protect his creatures other than burning out anything that threatens to block them, while also triggering prowess for Seeker of the Way. Rounding out the top 8 with arguably the most interesting deck here is Li Shitian, who ran a Jeskai Ascendancy combo deck. This is a deck that came somewhat out of nowhere and took a lot of people by surprise just by making top 8 at all. The basic combo is this. You get a Jeskai Ascendancy down along with some mana creature like Sylvan Caryatid or Rattleclaw Mystic. Then you hit one of them with a Retraction Helix. Then you cast a free artifact spell like an Astral Cornucopia or Briber's Purse with X equaling 0. Use the Helix creature to bounce that artifact and recast it, triggering Jeskai Ascendancy. That untaps your creatures and lets you loot to dig for your win con. Most decks search for Altar of the Brood, drop that, and then use the repeated artifact recasting to mill out their opponent. However, Tien's deck instead makes a ton of mana by twiddling mana creatures. Then it twin flames Kiora's Follower or Radical Mystic and attacks with an arbitrarily huge army of bears. Just think about that phrase, arbitrarily huge army of bears. Anyways, he ran a bunch of cantrips and card selection spells like Dragon Mantle, Commune with the Gods, and Tormenting Voice for consistency. A one-ofness or World Waker gave him a possible backup plan or an additional creature that could also produce mana to twiddle repeatedly. Amusingly, his sideboard was transformational, turning the deck into a Temur mid-range deck against decks that could disrupt his combo too easily. Keywords for this sideboard include 4 Savage Knuckleblade and 2 Pelucranos. It's a man who means business. And that's our Pro Tour top 8. Once again, the field was filled with Abzan and Jeskai, but this time around, Abzan came out on top. We're also starting to get a look at what the future of aggro and control look like. And we can now even say we're living in a standard with a viable combo deck. How exciting is that? In any case, next week there's a standard GP in Los Angeles, as well as an SCG Open in Worcester. We'll be back here next Monday with those results. As always, subscribe below for the latest and most reliable Magic the Gathering information you could ever need. This is the Manosaurus, I'm Wedge. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.